Okay, this is video 6.1c in trigonometry, inverse circular functions. We're on example 3. And it says find the degree measure of theta in the following. It's asking for degrees, not radians, so make sure you have your calculator in degrees, not radians. We're looking at theta equals the arctangent of 1, which actually means 1 equals the tangent of theta. So what angle has a tangent of theta? What angle has for its tangent opposite over adjacent or a number over itself? So I am looking, let's just say I'm looking at a graph here, and I know my opposite line is 2 and I know my adjacent line is 2. Well, I know whenever the adjacent and opposite are the same number, it's a 45-degree angle. So I know without really even doing any work that it's a 45-degree angle. But if you take your calculator and you put in 1 and then hit arc tangent, you will get a 45-degree angle for an answer. So either way, just drawing the picture or putting it in your calculator is what we're doing there. Alright, so let's look at B. Gives me theta equals the arc secant of 2. And let's rewrite that as 2 equals the secant of theta. And we can't use secant in our calculator. So we are going to write it instead as, this way. And then we can use our calculator in order to do that. And back to secant, because we know that 2 is positive, then we know that theta has to be in quadrant 1. All students take calculus, so we know that we're going to be in quadrant 1 for this. So remember, in our order to do this, it's the inverse, so secant is equal to 1 over the cosine of theta. Alright, the easiest way for me, I don't know if it's the way that anybody else prefers, but the easiest way for me to solve this is to cross multiply. So let's get rid of some of this. I'm going to write this as 2 over 1. So I'm going to take 2 times the cosine of theta equals 1 times 1. So 2 cosine of theta equals 1. Divide by 2, divide by 2. And actually then what I'm looking for is the cosine of theta equals 1/2. Okay, that's the way I do it, because when I'm given this stuff up here as 2 equals 1 over cosine of theta, it's like, okay, what do I do with that? But if I cross multiply and isolate my cosine of theta equals 1/2, then I can rewrite this. And I can, let's move this up here and this stuff out of the way. So at this point, I've got this here. And I can rewrite this as the cosecant negative 1 of 1/2 equals theta. So remember, switch these around, put a negative 1 up there, and you can do that. And then you put 1/2 in your calculator and take the arc cosine, and you'll get 60 degrees for your answer. And that'll end up being the arc secant of 2, the angle that gives me a ratio of 2 when I take the secant of that angle. So, key thing is being able to remember that, now let me move my stuff down a little bit here again, is this part right here, doing the cross multiplication. When you're, instead of writing secant, you're writing it as 1 over cosine. And if you have cosecant, writing it as 1 over sine. And then cross multiplying, isolate the trig term here, and then flipping it around so that it is an arc cosine. So again, arc cosine, if you want to make this into an arc cosine, if you want to find this angle, you write it as cosine negative 1, saying I want to find the angle, bring the number you have right there, and that equals the angle, and then plug this into your calculator. So that is example 3. So another way to say what we just said as far as finding the secant negative 1 of x, what we're going to do is we're going to actually find the cosine -1 of 1 over x. Okay, that might be easier if you write that down. The same is going to be true, if we're trying to find the cosecant, -1 of x. Write that as the sine -1 of 1 over x. So all you're going to do is take this number, put it in here, take 1 divided by that, and take the arc sine of that. So let's say, for instance, let's get rid of all my circles. We have the cosecant -1 of 2. Then we go sine -1 of 1 over 2. That's what you're going to plug in your calculator and you get the right answer. Same way with tangent. So that should make it a lot easier using that formula right there. Put that in your notes because you will need that later. In fact, example 4 says find y in radians if y equals the cosecant -1 of -3. So if you just take what I just put in there, cosecant -1 of 3 is going to be the same as sine -1 of 1 over -3. So then all I have to take is my calculator, and I'm going to plug in 1 divided by -3 and then take the arc sine of that, and that will give me a number such as -0.34 something. Okay, so that ends up being the angle, which is kind of weird. Alright, so part B of example 4. Find theta in degrees if theta equals the arctangent, or arc cotangent of -0.3541. Okay, so we're finding this in degrees. Before we found it in radians, so now we're doing it in degrees. So set your calculator into the degree mode. If it asks you for radians, you're going to put it in the radian mode like you should have done for A. But in this one, you're going to be in the degree mode. And we're going to write arc cotangent. We'll just rewrite it as -1 because that's what my little example that I told you about was. And then that can be written as tangent -1. Oops. Let's make that a negative. Of 1 over -0.3541. Okay? That's all you have to remember. If you have that written down, that will save you a whole lot of time later. And we find out that this ends up being in quadrant number 2. Arc cotangent is in quadrant 2. If you look at your table, top of page 242, it says cotangent, or arc cotangent. The quadrants of the unit circle, it can be in quadrants 1 or 2, but when you're in quadrant 1, everything's positive. Well, we've got a negative right here. In fact, we started right here at a negative, so that means it's got to be in quadrant 2 because it's adjacent over opposite, and the adjacent line is negative in quadrant 2, and the opposite line is positive, so that would make me in quadrant 2. So whatever angle I get, I'm going to have to make sure that I'm in quadrant 2, so it's going to have to be a number between 90 and 180, and I'm not going to get that kind of number there. I'm going to get a number like maybe 71, 72 degrees, maybe even 70 degrees for an answer there, and that's not in quadrant 2. So that being the case, I'm going to have to look over in that quadrant and take 180 minus that 70 degrees or whatever and get about 110 degrees because I'm going to be in that quadrant 2. So I need to remember that when I draw my angle here, this angle is going to be like a 70 degree angle. Well, I am over here. Okay, so that's what the pink angle is what I'm looking at. So if this is like 70 degrees, and this one has to be like 110 degrees. So make sure you remember what quadrant you're in, And always go from your initial side up this way. Your calculator may give this 110 to you, but mine doesn't. Mine just gave me around 70 degrees here, and I know that in quadrant 2 it's not a 70-degree angle. It is here, but it's not from the initial side. So I have to take this angle here in order to get my answer there. So just something to remember. And that's it for 6.1c. We'll finish up with this next video.